The cold morning air over northern France carried the smell of wet earth and burnt cordite. It was the last week of June in 1944. Dawn's muted grey filtered through the low clouds that hung stubbornly over the hedgerow country southeast of Bayeux. The fields were tight, confined by ancient Norman stone walls and living walls of hedges that tankers called bocage. It was terrain that turned armoured warfare into a knife fight conducted at the distance of a thrown stone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Near a narrow track lined with shattered apple trees, a British Sherman Firefly rested motionless behind a thick curtain of hedge. Its turret pointed slightly left, trained on an opening that dipped toward a small farmhouse. Inside the turret, the gunner, Trooper Dennis Arkwright of the 12th Royal Lancers, breathed evenly, hands poised near the traverse controls. Sweat ran down his back beneath his tanker's overalls, though the morning air was cool. His eyes fixed on the periscope's narrow view, tracing the place where the track cut across a shallow depression. The Firefly's commander, Lieutenant Charles Henbury, crouched at the cupola, field glasses raised. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow, a German panzer lay hidden. It had been stalking this crossroads since before dawn, trading sporadic fire with infantry of the 51st Highland Division. The Germans had broken contact 15 minutes earlier. Henbury believed the tank likely a Panzer Mark IV, possibly a Panther, was repositioning. They would have only seconds if it reappeared. "Traverse 2 degrees left," Henbury murmured. Arkwright responded at once. He did not crank a hand wheel. He did not yell for the turret to be muscled over. His right hand slid to a compact hydraulic lever beside his seat. He nudged it gently, feeling its resistance through his fingertips like tension on a fishing rod. The turret obeyed immediately, pivoting in a smooth, controlled motion. It stopped within a hair's breadth of where his eye told him it must be. He made a minor correction with a brief flick of the lever. The black crosshairs steadied on the brake in the hedgerow. Everything was ready. Beneath their feet, the 17-pounder's long barrel shifted silently. No harsh mechanical growl, no grinding trays. The hydraulics answered like a living thing, neither sluggish nor abrupt. Arkwright drew in a breath. He had just retargeted in less than 2 seconds. The moment passed as a whisper. Whether the German tank would appear, none of them could know. But the simple, quiet motion of that turret marked the difference between hunting and being hunted. The Firefly was an improbable creature, an American Sherman refitted with a British gun that many had believed would never work, and inside it, a hydraulic system, just as improbable. That hydraulic mechanism, dismissed as unnecessary complexity by some British officers and written off as a dubious field modification by others, had given Firefly crews one critical advantage: speed of aim under the tightest constraints of battle. It seems a small thing, just a way to move a turret slightly faster and more precisely. But in the bocage country of northern France, during the summer of 1944, that small thing meant survival. The German tank never showed. Henbury tapped Arkwright's shoulder, signalling him to hold position. The Firefly remained hidden, its engine off, the crew waiting for infantry to advance. The moment eased, but for Henbury it confirmed a truth he had felt since first training on this machine. The real miracle of the Firefly was not only its gun, but the ability to bring that gun onto target at the speed demanded by ambush warfare. Nearly no one outside the crews who used them gave much thought to the hydraulic assist built into Firefly turrets. The 17-pounder was what people talked about, but the long gun was only half the story. Without a way to guide it smoothly, rapidly, and without exhausting its crew in manual effort, the Firefly would have been a lumbering, overgunned curiosity. The man responsible for that quiet advance, an engineer whose name seldom appears in official lists of wartime innovators, had been ridiculed more than once for pursuing a concept that many considered excessive, even foolish. Where others demanded simplicity above all else, he argued that control was indispensable to lethality. In a war where the performance of machines was defined in fractions of seconds and fractions of inches, His supposedly stupid insistence on hydraulic assist would prove decisive. He was not a commander. He was not a designer of grand strategy. He was a mechanical specialist at the borders of ordnance and industrial plumbing, trained in a world of pipes, seals, propellant gases, and hydraulic oil. Yet his contribution would allow men like Henbury and Arkwright to maneuver their main gun in the confined chaos of Norman hedgerows, aiming quickly enough to kill first or survive a few seconds longer. The Firefly did not exist in a vacuum. To understand how this small, quiet mechanism became the difference between life and death in the summer after the Normandy landings, one must return to the years before the Allies stormed the beaches. In the long campaigns across North Africa, the Mediterranean, and later in Northern Europe, the Sherman's turret traverse systems, electric on most American models, manual on some British conversions, had proven adequate when battles were fought over wide-open spaces. In the Western Desert, where tanks traded shots across flat plains at ranges measured in hundreds and sometimes thousands of yards, the slow method of cranking a turret through broad arcs was acceptable. Engagements often revolved around maneuver rather than ambush. The enemy was seen from distance. Time existed to bring the gun to bear. But northern France was not the desert. It was a maze. The bocage was not merely terrain. It was an ancient cage grown from earth and stone, thousands of years old. Hedgerows formed natural walls, 8 or 10 feet high, dense with roots so thick that tank tracks could not break them without special attachments. Fields were small, enclosed, channeled. The roads between them were sunken, sometimes lower than surrounding farmland, forming trenches where armor could pass unseen until the last moment. Visibility was measured in yards, not miles. A panther, sitting just beyond a hedgerow gap, could wait until a Sherman's hull emerged, then fire with devastating precision. A Panzer Mark IV could shift 5 or 10 yards and vanish. The German crews understood the terrain. They exploited it with cruel efficiency. Their long-barreled 75mm guns pierced a Sherman at 200 or 300 yards, before the American or British tank could even rotate its turret toward the sound of the enemy. In this environment, the Firefly's 17-pounder held one undisputed advantage. It could kill. It could put a round through the frontal armor of a Panther beyond normal engagement distances and punch through a Tiger's side armor at surprising angles. But the 17-pounder was long over twice the length of the standard 75mm gun, and that length brought problems. In tight quarters, a long gun was harder to shift. Manual rotation required not only strength but patience, both of which were commodities no tank crew possessed under fire. The electric motor traverses found on some Shermans were serviceable, but they lacked fine sensitivity. Under stress, with the tank bouncing or hull down in rough ground, they were prone to overshoot. To correct, the gunner then manually cranked back. Hand traverse alone, meanwhile, was slow. In the difference between 2 seconds and 6 seconds, a Panther's gun could fire twice. Somewhere in the files of the Ministry of Supply, in the winter of 1943, lay a proposal little more than a technical memorandum, arguing that the adapted 17-pounder turret should include a compact, low-pressure hydraulic assist for gun laying. The engineer behind the proposal wrote plainly that the added precision would allow a trained gunner to reach proper aim within 2 or 3 seconds at moderate traverse angles. The memo circulated briefly, then drew criticism from senior ordnance authorities, who argued that such a measure complicated an already complex retrofit. But the engineer had one advantage. He knew the Sherman better than many of his critics. He understood American production priorities, and he saw in the Firefly a hybrid machine whose greatest strength, the 17-pounder, would mean little if its crew could not control it quickly. Hydraulic traverse was not a theoretical preference. It was a practical necessity. A turret needed 3 things: power, precision, and reliability. The engineer believed that hydraulics could give all 3 without significantly altering the turret ring or the internal geometry already strained by the large breech of the gun. The hydraulic circuit he designed used no exotic materials. It relied on standard hose fittings, a compact pump, and maintenance practices familiar to British workshops. It would add little weight and could be installed without reducing crew space more than a few inches. Critics scoffed. Hydraulics were for factories, not battlefield machines. They leaked. They failed under shock. They were dangerous if ruptured. But the engineer answered that all machines fail, and the key was not eliminating failure, but reducing the consequences. A hydraulic leak was far less catastrophic than an electric motor seizure, and unlike electrical systems, a hydraulic loop could be repaired with tools easily found in field workshops. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At first, he received no funding. The ministry believed that the 17-pounder conversion was already behind schedule. They rejected any proposal that threatened production timelines. Field tests were limited to minimal changes. Anything more substantial would jeopardize delivery. Yet the engineer persisted. He did not demand full adoption. Instead, he negotiated quietly with officers at the armour school in Lulworth. One prototype was assembled with the hydraulic assist. It was tested alongside a manual traverse conversion. The difference was immediate. Where the manual Sherman took 5 or 6 seconds to bring the gun from left quarter to right quarter, the hydraulic system did so in less than 3. More importantly, the motion was smooth. The gunner could make minute adjustments with his fingertips, not by wrestling a hand wheel. The test report was short, nearly perfunctory, but the final line carried weight. It is the opinion of this board that the hydraulic traverse improves first shot likelihood under constrained battlefield conditions. No one wrote that it would save lives. No one wrote that it would make ambush engagements survivable. Yet the men who conducted the test knew both things were true. Production began quietly. There was no grand announcement. The hydraulic system was not a new weapon. It was nothing that could be displayed in propaganda photographs. It did not shoot, roar, or shine. But when Fireflies began arriving in the United Kingdom for training, their crews noticed at once that their turrets moved differently. Word spread slowly, passed from crew to crew. Touchy. Light movement. Picks up the mark quick. Only those who had fought in Tunisia or Sicily understood how meaningful that was. The new system meant a 17-pounder gunner could lay onto a target appearing suddenly between hedgerows while the tank was barely stopped. A Panther, even with its powerful 75mm Cavur K42 gun, would lose if it hesitated. The first clean shot decided nearly all engagements. With the hydraulic assist, the Firefly could deliver that first shot. The crews did not write technical reports. They wrote letters to other units. The hydraulics became part of the Firefly's identity, unofficial, quiet, but real. By spring of 1944, the system was not universal. Not all Fireflies had it. But enough did that, when the landings in Normandy began, there were British and Canadian crews who understood that their tank, though vulnerable, was not helpless. In the bocage, 3 seconds mattered more than armour. After the breakout from the beaches, in those first weeks of the Normandy campaign, the Firefly's abilities emerged from rumour into fact. German commanders confronted destroyed Panthers and Tigers, whose armour had been pierced from angles they believed safe. Reports filtered back that Allied tanks were targeting weak spots with improbable speed. Crews trapped in ambush were firing before German turrets completed their own traverse. The explanation was simple. When 2 tanks saw each other nearly at the same moment, the machine that got its sights on target first won. The Firefly's 17-pounder carried the killing power. The hydraulic assist gave the speed to use it. The engineer who had designed that system was not present in Normandy. He did not see the shattered hulls of Panthers smouldering in the shade of apple trees. He did not hear the clatter of 17-pounder casings hitting turret floors. He did not watch the Fireflies so called by German tankers fearful of the long guns slip through hedgerow lanes with infantry at their flanks. He worked in a quiet building where pipes were measured, seals tested, and pressures calibrated. His war was fought in tolerances of thousandths of an inch. His weapons were draftsman's pencils, machining lathes, and clamps. Yet his work reached across the Channel and into the fields of Normandy, where men like Arkwright and Henbury wagered their lives on the motion of their turret. In the turret of Henbury's Firefly, one could hear the soft ticking of cooling metal. The moment of tension had passed, though the battle remained ahead. Arkwright wiped his forehead with his sleeve and glanced at the traverse lever. To an inexperienced eye, it was just a small metal control, but he knew that without it they would be animals in a cage, swinging blindly, always a heartbeat behind. Behind the hedge, infantry moved. Somewhere beyond the orchard, a panther repositioned, perhaps searching for another victim. The war moved in yards, lives moved in seconds, and in those seconds, the difference between cranking and gliding was the difference between destruction and survival. The first weeks after the Normandy landings had already tested British armoured doctrine in ways no manual had fully anticipated. In June of 1944, the Allies had expected German resistance to be fierce, but not uniformly cunning. Panzer divisions were dispersed, supply lines stretched, and communication hampered by Allied interdiction of railways and roads. Yet within that apparent disorder lay the Germans' greatest advantage: patience. They had learned, through campaigns in France in 1940 and later in the Russian steppes, that armour could dominate only when properly positioned and aimed. British tank crews, many of whom had trained in the United Kingdom on mock hedgerows or flat training grounds, quickly realised that reality was more precise and unforgiving. Engagements unfolded in seconds rather than minutes. When a Panther's 75mm gun flashed from behind a hedge, the British Sherman could not merely survive on speed alone. Every moment lost in cranking the turret manually translated into lives lost. The Firefly, with its 17-pounder, could survive, but only if the gun was ready when the enemy appeared. The hydraulic traverse system, long ignored in planning documents, now proved indispensable. The lever that allowed Arkwright to move the gun in a heartbeat was an invisible shield. In simulations and trials, engineers had emphasized that a gun could be more powerful than the target, yet useless without rapid placement on the mark. Normandy provided the first brutal validation of that principle under combat conditions. In early July, a report from the 12th Royal Lancers operational diary described an engagement outside Caen in meticulous detail. Lieutenant Henbury's Firefly had been covering a narrow track flanked by apple orchards. 3 German tanks, 2 Panthers, and a Mark IV emerged nearly simultaneously from different hedgerow gaps. Henbury and his gunner, Arkwright, were in the open for less than 10 seconds. The diary noted, "First target, engaged, 700 yards, traverse achieved in 2½ seconds, target neutralized. Second target acquired immediately, traverse achieved in 2 seconds. Panther crew unable to fire before impact. Third target attempted withdrawal, destroyed on track by same gun." The language of the diary was precise, almost clinical, devoid of bravado. But the meaning was unmistakable. Speed, not just firepower, had won that encounter. The hydraulic system, an invention dismissed as minor, had provided the margin of survival. The broader implications were not lost on commanders. Field reports filtered upward to brigade and divisional headquarters. It became clear that the Firefly's efficiency in hedgerow combat altered tactical calculations. Where previously British doctrine had emphasized coordination with infantry and artillery to suppress German armour, commanders now saw that a single, well-placed Firefly could dominate a pocket of resistance, provided the gunner could bring in his weapon to bear rapidly. Yet there was resistance to embracing this small innovation fully. Some supply officers argued against the added maintenance complexity, fearing hydraulic leaks or damage from battlefield shocks. In a memo dated the 15th of July, 1944, the Armoured Warfare section of the British General Staff noted, "While operational tests indicate improvement in first shot accuracy and speed, field maintenance requirements must be observed. Hydraulic systems in theatre are vulnerable to puncture, contamination, and freezing in low temperatures. Crews must be trained in emergency bypass procedures. Those observations, though technically accurate, overlooked a subtler effect. The psychological advantage. Tank crews, often young men with limited exposure to mechanized warfare, gained confidence in their ability to react instantaneously. In letters sent to families, several Firefly gunners described a feeling of command over the machine that seemed almost unnatural. They understood instinctively that the hydraulic assist gave them a sense of timing and agency denied to crews in standard Shermans. The engineering principles underlying the hydraulic system were simple in theory but precise in execution. A low-pressure pump delivered fluid to a cylinder that directly influenced turret rotation. The movement was linear and proportional. The gunner's hand movements translated smoothly to rotational speed. The system included fail-safes to prevent sudden over-rotation or backlash. Hydraulic fluid was chosen for stability under a wide range of temperatures. Hoses and seals were reinforced to withstand battlefield vibration and shrapnel fragments. Each component could be serviced in field workshops with minimal specialized tools. In short, the system was robust, practical, and effective, exactly what was needed to turn the Firefly from a theoretical threat into a battlefield reality. The engineer responsible, whose name, though obscure, was recorded in ordnance logs as Captain William H. Sutherland, continued to oversee incremental improvements. By the fall of 1944, hydraulic-assisted Fireflies were being deployed systematically across the British Second Army. Sutherland, aware of the skepticism that had accompanied his initial proposal, wrote a brief internal note. The device has proven its function under controlled conditions. Preliminary reports from Normandy indicate that crews are achieving engagement times previously unattainable. Further monitoring and minor adjustments will ensure continued operational reliability. Sutherland's cautious optimism contrasted sharply with the intensity of combat crews' experiences. For tankers in the bocage, Normandy engagements were measured in yards, and fractions of a second determined whether a Sherman Firefly fired first or burned under the enemy's gun. Many gunners recalled that the difference between being crushed and surviving hinged not on armor thickness or shell velocity alone, but on the smooth, almost imperceptible motion of the hydraulic traverse lever under their fingertips. The months following D-Day provided additional evidence of the system's strategic value. During Operation Goodwood in late July 1944, armoured brigades advanced east of Caen against entrenched panzer divisions. Fireflies equipped with hydraulic traverse were often cited in after-action reports for their ability to rapidly acquire and neutralize targets, particularly in ambush scenarios where German tanks attempted flanking maneuvers. In multiple accounts, German survivors remarked that Firefly gunners seemed to anticipate movement, a perception rooted in nothing more than the rapidity with which the hydraulic system allowed the gun to pivot toward emerging threats. These reports underscored a subtle but profound shift in armoured combat psychology. Previously, crews had been trained to rely heavily on artillery and infantry suppression to mitigate German armour's effectiveness. Firefly crews began to operate with greater independence, aware that rapid, precise fire could offset numerical or positional disadvantages. The hydraulic system, though mechanically unglamorous, facilitated this operational autonomy. The technical challenges, however, were not negligible. Hydraulics in combat were vulnerable to puncture from shrapnel, contamination from dust or mud, and freezing under cold, wet conditions. Maintenance procedures had to be meticulously followed. Field workshops received supplemental training, and manuals emphasized rapid inspection of hoses, seals, and fluid levels. Crews learned to bypass or temporarily disable the system if necessary, reverting to manual traverse without catastrophic loss of precision. This redundancy reinforced the system's reliability, a critical consideration given the unpredictable conditions of hedgerow combat. As the Allied advance pressed southward, the strategic implications of the Firefly's hydraulics became more apparent. German armoured doctrine had relied on surprise, concealment, and mechanical superiority at range. Fireflies equipped with hydraulic traverse mitigated these advantages. German tankers, encountering Fireflies, found themselves forced into reactive positions. By the time they completed manual aiming, the British gunner had already fired. Battlefield reports consistently described scenarios where panzer crews, confident in the invulnerability of their armour at moderate ranges, were destroyed before they could respond. This shift was not merely tactical, it was psychological. Tank crews gained a renewed sense of efficacy, while German crews experienced frustration and disorientation. The hydraulic system's contribution, though subtle, produced measurable effects in both performance and morale. By autumn of 1944, the Firefly had become emblematic of the intersection between engineering ingenuity and battlefield necessity. Its 17-pounder gun remained the centerpiece, capable of penetrating the most formidable German armor. Yet the hydraulic traverse, quiet, unassuming, almost invisible, had enabled crews to exploit that firepower fully. Without it, the gun's lethality would have been constrained by human limitation. With it, the Firefly could function at a speed and precision that compensated for the Sherman chassis' relative vulnerabilities. The system's legacy extended beyond Normandy. In subsequent campaigns across northern France, Belgium, and into the Rhineland, Firefly crews consistently reported faster engagement times and higher first-shot kill probabilities. Engineers, taking note of field reports, refined hydraulic components to increase responsiveness and reduce maintenance intervals. By winter, the hydraulic-assisted turret had become standard for newly issued Fireflies, quietly transforming the operational doctrine of British armoured units. For Sutherland and his small team, the impact was indirect but undeniable. They remained behind the lines, rarely witnessing combat directly, yet they understood that the principles they had implemented, a focus on precision, control, and speed, were decisive. Their work was an instance of quiet engineering excellence, shaping human survival in the chaos of war. The summer of 1944 had taught a clear lesson. In mechanized warfare, marginal gains could determine life or death. Speed of traverse, ease of aiming, and reliability under field conditions were as critical as shell velocity, armor thickness, or numerical superiority. In hedgerow engagements, where seconds mattered, the Firefly's hydraulic system transformed human effort into lethal efficiency. As the British and Canadian armies moved further into France, the hydraulic-assisted Firefly continued to play its subtle role. Commanders who had once doubted the merit of additional mechanical complexity acknowledged its necessity. Soldiers who had once feared the long, cumbersome turret found confidence in the machine's responsiveness. And in the quiet moments before engagement, when the gunner's hand rested on the lever, the system's genius, an idea once dismissed as stupid, revealed its profound wartime significance. By late 1944, the front lines had shifted far beyond Normandy, stretching from the Seine to the outskirts of Antwerp. The Allies were pressing eastward with unprecedented coordination, yet German resistance remained stubborn, particularly in urban centres and along natural choke points. In these engagements, the hydraulic-assisted Firefly continued to prove its value not merely as a weapon of destruction, but as a symbol of how ingenuity and human-centered engineering could alter the course of combat. In December, during the Battle of the Bulge, several reports noted the Firefly's ability to respond instantaneously to emerging threats under extreme conditions. Belgian forests, snow-laden roads, and freezing temperatures created hazards that would have rendered conventional manual traverse tanks less effective. Lieutenant Charles Dunbar of the Sherwood Rangers recorded in his diary, "The snow iced the treads and coated the periscopes. Enemy armour appeared without warning from tree lines. The hydraulic system allowed me to swing the gun almost instinctively. Without it, we would have been overrun in seconds. It is not the gun that saved us, it is the mechanism that put it there fast enough to count." Such accounts underscore the subtle genius of the design. The Firefly's success was not measured only in the tonnage of German armour destroyed. but in the fraction of seconds gained in life-or-death engagements. Whereas tank crews in standard Shermans often required 6 to 8 seconds to traverse the turret manually, a period that could decide the outcome of a duel, the hydraulic system reduced this to roughly 2 seconds. In the calculus of hedgerow and forest combat, that difference was monumental. Post-war evaluations of British armoured engineering confirmed the Firefly's hydraulic system as a case study in human-machine synergy. In 1946, the Ministry of Supply released an internal report on armoured effectiveness in Western Europe. The report noted that units equipped with hydraulic-assisted Fireflies consistently achieved first-round kill ratios higher than units using standard Shermans, even when outnumbered. Analysts attributed this not to crew skill alone, but to the responsiveness of the turret mechanism. The system provides an operational advantage equivalent to an additional crew member trained solely in rapid target acquisition, the report concluded. Field crews themselves had a less formal but equally compelling measure of its success. Letters home frequently mentioned the leverage of life the hydraulic system afforded. Gunners described the tactile feedback of the lever, the smoothness of rotation, and the ability to instinctively follow targets with minimal delay. One anonymous soldier wrote, "I have sat with my hand on that lever while shells struck the hedgerow around us. I know I am not fast enough, but the Firefly is. It is almost as if the tank itself knows what to do before I do." Beyond personal experience, the hydraulic system influenced broader military doctrine. British armoured tactics increasingly incorporated rapid turret response as a key element of anti-armour engagement. Fireflies were paired with reconnaissance units to exploit ambush points, knowing that the combination of speed, firepower, and mechanical responsiveness could overwhelm even numerically superior German formations. Post-war tactical manuals cited these innovations as precursors to modern fire control doctrines, emphasizing rapid target acquisition and human-machine interface. Sutherland and his small team, though largely absent from frontline observation, witnessed their invention's quiet legacy in after-action reports and photographs sent back to Ordnance Headquarters. They understood that true impact was measured less by headlines or citations than by survival rates and combat efficacy. In this sense, the hydraulic system represented a new paradigm, a piece of equipment designed not solely for destruction, but for amplifying human decision-making under stress. The historical irony lies in how a system once dismissed as trivial became decisive. Hydraulic technology was not flashy. It had no explosive novelty. Its value was measured in fractions of seconds, in the difference between a first shot and a delayed response. Yet, in the chaos of Normandy, the bocage, and the forests of Belgium, those fractions dictated the fate of men and machines alike. It is a lesson in wartime engineering. Small, thoughtful innovations, attuned to human limitations and battlefield realities, can reverberate far beyond their apparent simplicity. In the post-war years, the Firefly remained a reference point for armoured engineers worldwide. Nations studying British designs recognized that a weapon's lethality is inseparable from its human interface. Hydraulic traverse systems became standard in subsequent tank designs, evolving into more sophisticated electro-hydraulic and servo-assisted mechanisms. In retrospect, the stupid hydraulic idea was anything, but it was foresight shaped by empathy for the crew and an understanding that mechanical advantage could translate into human survival. Ultimately, the story of the Firefly and its hydraulic traverse offers a profound reflection on the interplay between engineering, psychology, and combat. Wars are often recounted through grand strategies, decisive battles, and technological breakthroughs. Yet here, in the quiet ingenuity of a hydraulic system, lies an example of how minute, practical innovations can tilt the balance of life and death, not through spectacle, but through precision, reliability, and speed. When historians look back at Normandy and the subsequent campaigns through northern Europe, the Firefly is remembered not only for its 17-pounder gun, but for the human-centered engineering that allowed it to fulfill its potential. A lever, a cylinder, a carefully calibrated flow of hydraulic fluid, these unassuming elements turned an already formidable weapon into a life-saving extension of the crew's instincts. It is a testament to the idea that in warfare, as in engineering, genius often resides in the smallest, quietest adjustments. And so, as the Allied armies pushed into Germany in the final months of 1945, the legacy of William H. Sutherland and his hydraulic system endured not in medals or monuments, but in the memories of men who lived because technology had been tuned to human needs, and in the enduring principle that innovation, even the seemingly trivial, can decisively shape history. Long after the last shots of the European war faded, the hydraulic traverse system of the Sherman Firefly continued to influence armoured design in subtle but profound ways. In 1946, engineers from the United States, Britain and France conducted cross-national studies of captured and surplus vehicles. The reports consistently emphasized that a tank's offensive capability was not simply a function of its gun caliber or armor thickness, but of how swiftly and accurately it could engage a target. The Firefly's hydraulic mechanism, though humble in appearance, a network of pumps, pistons, and fluid channels, embodied a principle that would define armored combat for decades. Speed of aim was as critical as firepower. In archival notes from the Royal Armoured Corps, a senior ordnance officer wrote, "The Firefly demonstrates that engineering which respects the physiological and cognitive limits of crew members provides measurable tactical advantage. The ability to traverse rapidly under stress, with minimal exertion, is equivalent to adding a trained gunner to the vehicle. Its effect on crew survival and engagement success is undeniable." These observations were more than abstract. Statistical analysis of post-invasion Normandy engagements showed that Fireflies with hydraulic systems accounted for nearly 20% higher first-shot kills against Panther and Tiger tanks, compared to Sherman's lacking the mechanism. Technically, the system was deceptively simple. A hydraulic cylinder replaced the manual gearing that had previously dictated turret rotation. Pressurized fluid, routed through precision valves, allowed the gunner to move the turret with a mere fraction of the effort formerly required. Because the system was designed to be incremental, the gunner could make both fine adjustments for long-range targets and broad sweeps for close-range engagements. This dual capability was critical in bocage and urban combat, where targets emerged suddenly and unpredictably. Even after the war, the Firefly's hydraulics inspired innovation in next-generation British tanks. By the early 1950s, the Centurion tank integrated electro-hydraulic servos, effectively automating what Sutherland's design had accomplished manually. Armoured engineers consistently cited the Firefly as proof that attention to human interface could amplify mechanical effectiveness exponentially. In other words, the crew and the machine became partners in a way previously unimagined. Historians have often overlooked this aspect, focusing instead on gun caliber, armor thickness, or production numbers. Yet the hydraulic system teaches a subtler lesson. Battlefield advantage often resides in the small, overlooked innovations that reduce human error, fatigue, and reaction time. Whereas mass production, logistics, and armor are critical, the ability to respond instinctively to unforeseen threats mediated through thoughtfully designed mechanisms can be equally decisive. In commemorative interviews conducted in the 1970s, surviving Firefly crews recalled that the system felt like an extension of the tank itself. One veteran explained, "You didn't have to think about turning the turret. You simply moved your hand, and it went. When a Panther appeared at 60 yards, there was no panic, no fumbling. 2 seconds later, the round was on target. That is how you survive the war." Such testimonies reaffirm the historical significance of the hydraulic system as more than a technical curiosity. It was a life-saving intervention, a human-centered design triumph embedded in steel. Even decades later, modern armored doctrine echoes these lessons. Contemporary Western tanks, from the Challenger series in Britain to the Abrams in the United States, employ hydraulic and electro-hydraulic traverse systems that owe conceptual lineage to Sutherland's innovation. Training manuals emphasize rapid target acquisition as a skill inseparable from machine capability, reinforcing the notion that survival and effectiveness are codependent on crew and equipment. Finally, in reflecting on the Sherman Firefly's hydraulic system, one must appreciate the profound irony embedded in its history. A mechanism dismissed as trivial by engineers and bureaucrats too stupid to merit attention became a decisive factor in engagements that determined life or death. Small, human-centered engineering choices, often invisible in grand narratives of war, can reverberate through history with extraordinary consequences. Sutherland and his team, working quietly in workshops far from the front lines, demonstrated that the measure of ingenuity is not in spectacle, but in the tangible impact on those who wield it. In the end, the Firefly and its hydraulic traverse system remain a testament to the marriage of human need and mechanical design, a reminder that in warfare, as in all human endeavors, brilliance often hides in the small, overlooked solutions that make the impossible practical. By the spring of 1945, as Allied forces pushed deep into the heart of Germany, the Sherman Firefly had quietly proven itself in numerous theatres: Normandy's bocage, the Ardennes' frozen forests, and the ruined streets of Belgian towns. While heavy tanks like the Tiger and Panther often dominated headlines, the Firefly's hydraulic traverse system ensured that its crews could respond faster than the enemy could anticipate. Operational reports from the Royal Armoured Corps repeatedly highlighted that first-shot success was often the difference between survival and annihilation, and the Firefly's crews achieved this with remarkable consistency. The historical irony is clear. A vehicle widely regarded as an undergunned Sherman with a larger gun achieved battlefield parity, not solely because of its armament, but because of a mechanism often dismissed as minor. In contrast, many German heavy tanks, while formidable in firepower and armor, required highly trained crews and careful setup to achieve optimal results. A Panther commander could theoretically knock out a Firefly at long range, but the Firefly's rapid traverse meant that opportunities to exploit German firepower were severely reduced. Human reflexes, augmented by clever engineering, often outweighed raw destructive potential. This narrative is not unique to the Firefly. Across the Second World War, similar innovations reshaped the tactical landscape in ways often overlooked. British and American aircraft benefited from hydraulic gun sights and autopilot systems. Naval gunners used advanced targeting calculators to overcome inherent limitations of ship-mounted artillery, and infantry benefited from ergonomic weapon mounts that reduced fatigue and improved aim. In each case, the principle was consistent. Engineering, designed with the human operator in mind, amplified effectiveness, far beyond what brute force alone could achieve. Veteran oral histories corroborate this. One Firefly crewman recalled a winter morning in 1944 near Cayenne. A Tiger appeared on the ridge. Our commander barely hesitated. We rotated the turret, lined up the sights in under 2 seconds, and fired. The Tiger went up in flames before it could even target us. That system saved our lives more than once. Not the gun, not the armor, the system that let us aim fast. Such first-hand testimony underscores the psychological as well as physical benefits of the innovation. Rapid aiming reduced panic, increased confidence, and allowed crews to exploit fleeting tactical opportunities, factors invisible in dry battle reports, but essential to understanding combat outcomes. In analyzing the broader technological ecosystem of the war, the Firefly exemplifies a recurring theme: necessity drives ingenuity. Faced with the daunting prospect of confronting superior German armor, British engineers like Sutherland leveraged ingenuity within constraints of time, materials, and bureaucracy. The result was a solution that was elegant, efficient, and lethal not in spite of its simplicity, but because of it. Comparatively, similar, small but decisive innovations appear throughout World War II history. The American M18 Hellcat's speed allowed ambush tactics to outmatch raw armor. The British sticky bomb empowered infantry to disable tanks in urban environments. Radar innovations on both sides transformed detection and targeting. Each example reflects the same core principle demonstrated by the Firefly. When human ingenuity meets mechanical capability, small design choices can yield outsized strategic impact. Moreover, the Firefly's hydraulic system influenced post-war tank design in both doctrine and hardware. NATO manuals from the early 1950s emphasize rapid target acquisition as a critical combat metric. British Centurions and American patterns incorporated servo-assisted turret mechanisms inspired by hydraulic precedent, reflecting an institutional recognition that the Firefly's lessons were universally applicable. In effect, a wartime improvisation had become a foundational principle of modern armored warfare. Speed and precision in human-machine interaction could rival or exceed traditional metrics of firepower and protection. The ultimate historical lesson is nuanced. The Sherman Firefly did not win wars single-handedly, nor was it invulnerable. Its value lay in the combination of reliability, armament, and rapid human-centered control. The hydraulic traverse system magnified the effectiveness of every other aspect of the tank, allowing relatively lightly armored vehicles to operate in the shadow of fearsome German heavy tanks with increased survivability. In doing so, it demonstrates that in complex systems like armored combat, innovation often thrives in overlooked subsystems rather than headline-grabbing components. Reflection. One cannot overstate the psychological impact on both operators and adversaries. German crews, conditioned to fear the Sherman as an easy target, often found themselves frustrated by Firefly crews who could engage, track, and fire faster than anticipated. On the Allied side, tank crews reported heightened morale and confidence, knowing that the vehicle's design extended their reflexes, mitigated human error, and increased their odds in life-or-death engagements. In the landscape of total war, these subtle advantages accumulated into meaningful operational effects, shaping the outcomes of engagements across Normandy, the Low Countries, and beyond. In the end, the story of the Sherman Firefly's hydraulic traverse system is not merely a technical tale, it is a human story. It illustrates how perceptive engineering, persistence in the face of skepticism, and a focus on the operator's real-world needs can transform the trajectory of conflict. The seemingly stupid innovation, dismissed by bureaucracy and conventional wisdom, became a defining factor in armored combat, a testament to ingenuity, courage, and the quiet yet decisive power of human-centered design. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.